Commander Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of New Eden Colony and watched the stars. The year was 2157 and humanity had spread across 12 star systems. Life was good on the colony worlds. People worked hard, but they were free. They built homes and raised families under alien suns. Jake had been protecting this colony for 3 years now. He never thought he would need to protect it from something like this. The warning came at dawn. Lieutenant Lisa Grant burst into the command center with her face pale and her hands shaking. She pointed at the scanner displays and tried to speak, but no words came out. Jake looked at the screens and felt his blood turn cold. 30 massive ships hung in space above New Eden. They were bigger than anything humans had ever built. Their hulls gleamed like black metal, and they moved with purpose that made Jake's stomach twist. The message came 1 hour later. It broadcast on every frequency and in perfect human language. The voice was cold and mechanical, but somehow alive at the same time. It spoke of the hegemony and integration and the choice between submission and elimination. Jake had heard stories from deep space explorers about alien empires, but he never believed them. Now one of those empires floated above his home. Captain Ryan Burke assembled what defense forces they had. New Eden was a farming colony with mining operations. They had security teams and some old military equipment, but nothing that could fight real warships. Ryan had served in the Earth Defense Fleet before retiring to colony life. He knew they stood no chance in a straight fight. That meant they would have to be smart about this. The aliens gave them 24 hours to surrender. Jake spent those hours walking through the colony and talking to people. Families packed their belongings and children asked questions their parents could not answer. Some colonists wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The alien ships surrounded the planet and blocked all escape routes. Dr. Helen Martinez worked in the medical center and treated the wounded who came in from panic accidents. She had seen war before when rebels attacked her last posting. But this felt different. The aliens spoke about integration like it was a gift they were giving humanity. Helen knew better. She had read history books about conquerors who claimed they came in peace. The hegemony sent down a landing force the next morning. Jake watched through binoculars as strange craft descended from the massive ships. 3 different types of aliens emerged from the transports. The first looked like living crystals that walked on multiple legs and spoke in harmonic tones. The second resembled giant insects with metallic shells and compound eyes that never blinked. The third appeared to be made of pure energy contained in flowing robes that shifted between colors. Their leader was one of the crystal beings. It approached the colony gates with perfect confidence and spoke in that same cold, mechanical voice. It called itself the Vorthak Primarch and said the hegemony had come to bring order to this chaotic human settlement. It explained that 47 other species had joined the hegemony peacefully. Humanity would be the 48th. Jake met them at the gates with Ryan and Lisa and a dozen security officers. The Primarch towered over them, and its crystalline face showed no emotion. It spoke about efficiency and proper resource allocation and the benefits of collective consciousness. The insect aliens clicked their mandibles in what might have been agreement. The energy beings floated silently and watched everything with glowing eyes. Ryan asked what would happen to human culture and human freedom. The Primarch explained that such concepts were inefficient and would be replaced with better systems. Individual desires led to chaos and waste. The hegemony would teach humanity to think as one and work toward common goals. It would be paradise. Jake looked at the alien and said no. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. The Primarch tilted its crystal head and asked for clarification. Jake repeated himself. The humans of New Eden would not submit to integration. They would not give up their freedom or their way of life. The colony would resist. The other aliens stirred at this response. The insect beings raised their weapons and the energy creatures pulsed with brighter light. But the Primarch remained calm. It said that resistance was illogical and would result in unnecessary casualties. Surely humans were intelligent enough to see the benefits of cooperation. Lisa stepped forward and told the Primarch that humans valued freedom more than safety. They would rather die fighting than live as slaves. The alien looked confused by this statement. It asked why any species would choose death over peaceful existence. Ryan laughed and said the Primarch would learn soon enough. The negotiations ended when Jake ordered the aliens to leave the planet. The Primarch warned that military action would begin in 6 hours. Humans had that long to reconsider their foolish decision. Then the aliens returned to their ships and the colony prepared for war. Jake sent emergency broadcasts to Earth and the other colonies. He told them what was happening and warned them that humanity faced a threat unlike anything they had ever seen. But he also sent another message. New Eden would show these aliens that humans did not surrender easily. They would make the hegemony pay for every meter of ground. The first attack came at sunset. Alien fighters screamed down from orbit and struck the colony's power plant. But Jake had expected this. They had moved all essential equipment underground and rigged the power plant with explosives. When the alien bombs fell, the humans triggered their own charges. The explosion took out 3 enemy fighters and sent a message to the ships above. Ryan coordinated the evacuation of civilians to the mine tunnels, while Lisa organized the defense teams. They had hunting rifles and mining charges and farming equipment converted into weapons. Helen set up a medical station in the deepest tunnel and prepared for casualties. Everyone knew they could not win, but they also knew they had to try. Ground assault began at midnight. Alien troops poured from landing craft and advanced on the colony with overwhelming force. They expected the humans to break and run when faced with superior technology and numbers. Instead, they found humans who fought from every building and every shadow. Colonists used their knowledge of the terrain to set ambushes and traps. They turned their own infrastructure into weapons. The battle for New Eden had begun, and the universe was about to learn something new about humanity. The battle for New Eden lasted 3 weeks. When it finally ended, the hegemony had lost more ships than in their previous 10 conquests combined. The Crystal Primarch stood in the ruins of the colony center and tried to understand what had happened. Its forces had superior weapons and overwhelming numbers. They should have taken the planet in hours. Instead, they faced weeks of brutal fighting against an enemy that refused to surrender. The humans had turned their own colony into a weapon. They collapsed tunnels on advancing troops and used mining charges to bring down alien aircraft. Farmers drove tractors loaded with explosives into enemy positions. Medical staff treated wounded soldiers and then returned to fight with whatever weapons they could find. Even the children helped by carrying supplies and messages through secret passages. What disturbed the Primarch most was the human refusal to accept defeat. When cornered, they chose to destroy supply depots rather than let them fall into alien hands. When captured, they gave false information or said nothing at all. Some even used their capture as a chance to sabotage hegemony equipment from inside their own prison cells. The final transmission from New Eden reached Earth just as the colony fell. Commander Morrison spoke into a damaged radio while explosions echoed in the background. He told Admiral Susan Collins that the aliens could be beaten. They were strong, but they thought in patterns that humans could learn to exploit. His last words were a promise that humanity would make the hegemony pay for what they had done. Admiral Collins received the message in her office aboard the orbital station above Earth. She had spent 30 years in the defense fleet and fought pirates and rebels and corporate raiders. But she had never faced anything like this. The reports from New Eden described technology beyond human understanding and tactics that made no sense. The aliens fought like they were following a rulebook while the humans fought like they were writing their own. President Catherine Lewis called an emergency session of the United Colonies Council. Representatives from all 12 systems gathered in the Great Hall and listened to the recordings from New Eden. Some wanted to negotiate with the hegemony and find a peaceful solution. Others demanded immediate military action. But all of them understood that humanity faced its greatest challenge. Catherine stood before the council and spoke about freedom and the price of independence. She said that humanity had spent centuries learning to govern itself and would not give up that right to alien masters. The vote was unanimous. Earth and all human colonies would resist the hegemony with every resource they possessed. Dr. Andrew Shaw worked in a hidden research station beyond the outer planets. He studied fragments of alien technology recovered from New Eden and tried to understand how it functioned. The crystal beings used harmonic frequencies to control their equipment. The insect aliens employed biological computers that thought in hive patterns. The energy creatures manipulated quantum fields in ways that seemed impossible. But Shaw found something the aliens did not expect him to discover. Their technology relied on quantum entanglement networks that connected all their equipment. These networks could be disrupted by specific electromagnetic pulses. It was a weakness they had never worried about, because no species had ever fought back long enough to find it. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos led the first human counterattack against hegemony shipping lanes. She commanded a squadron of modified civilian ships that looked harmless but carried hidden weapons. Her crews were volunteers from every human world who wanted revenge for New Eden. They struck at alien supply convoys and disappeared before the enemy could respond. The hegemony expected their enemies to fight with honor and follow predictable patterns. Humans fought dirty and used deception and psychological warfare. Santos attacked from asteroid fields and used debris to hide her ships. She broadcast false surrender signals and then ambushed the aliens who came to accept her capitulation. Her tactics baffled the enemy commanders who had never faced such methods. The High Council of the Hegemony convened on their capital world of Zentara Prime. The Vorthak Primarch reported the loss of New Eden and the continuing human resistance. It recommended stronger measures to force compliance. The Zephyrian Queen Mind agreed and suggested that humanity was defective and should be eliminated rather than integrated. The Luminal Overlight proposed studying human psychology to understand their irrational behavior. For the first time in their 1,000-year expansion, the Hegemony Council debated what to do about a species that refused to surrender. Every other race had seen the futility of resistance and accepted integration peacefully. Humans seemed incapable of logical thought when it came to their own survival. The war spread to other systems as hegemony fleets moved to crush human resistance. But they found the same pattern everywhere. Humans would rather destroy their own infrastructure than let it fall into alien hands. They used their knowledge of local conditions to set traps and ambushes. They fought with farming tools and mining, equipment and anything else they could turn into weapons. Captain Tony Williams commanded the stealth ship Phoenix and led raids deep into hegemony territory. His navigation officer Rebecca Davis could plot courses through asteroid fields that should have been impossible. His chief engineer Carlos Rodriguez kept their ship running with spare parts scavenged from alien wrecks. They struck at targets. The enemy never thought to defend and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The psychological impact of human tactics began to affect hegemony forces. Soldiers who had never known fear started to hesitate before entering human territories. Ship captains requested additional escorts for routine missions. The crystal beings tried to analyze human irrationality, but found their logic systems unable to process such chaotic behavior. Dr. Shaw transmitted his discoveries about quantum network vulnerabilities to all human forces. Research teams on every world began developing weapons that could exploit these weaknesses. The first successful test destroyed an entire hegemony patrol group in seconds. The aliens watched their most advanced ship simply stop functioning and drift helplessly through space. Admiral Collins used this new knowledge to plan larger operations against hegemony positions. She realized that humanity had advantages the aliens could never match. Humans adapted quickly to new situations, while the aliens followed rigid protocols. Humans embraced chaos and uncertainty, while the aliens feared anything they could not predict or control. The hegemony tried to study human tactics and implement them in their own forces, but their collective consciousness and hive mind systems could not replicate human creativity. When insect drones attempted to act unpredictably, they simply became inefficient. When crystal soldiers tried to use deception, they followed such obvious patterns that humans saw through them immediately. Reports reached Earth of alien forces retreating from human positions for the first time in hegemony history. Some enemy units requested transfers away from human sectors. Others showed signs of what human psychologists recognized as combat stress and trauma. The mighty alien empire was beginning to crack under pressure from a species they had dismissed as primitive. Maria Santos received intelligence that other species were watching the human resistance with growing interest. The Kalites, who had surrendered 50 years ago, began asking questions about human tactics. The Ondari, who had been enslaved for 3 centuries, started sabotaging production facilities in ways that looked like accidents. The idea of resistance was spreading through the galaxy like a virus. Species that had accepted hegemony rule for generations began to remember what freedom felt like. They saw that the mighty alien empire could be challenged and beaten. The humans had shown them that surrender was not the only option when faced with superior force. President Lewis addressed the colonies again and spoke about the responsibility that came with their unexpected success. Humanity had become a symbol of hope for enslaved species across the galaxy. They could not afford to lose this war because too many others were counting on them to show the way to freedom. The war entered its 2nd year with no sign of ending. The hegemony committed more resources to the human sector and brought in their best commanders and elite units. They expected to crush the resistance quickly with overwhelming force. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that learned and adapted faster than they could respond. Captain Tony Williams guided the Phoenix through an asteroid field toward a hegemony supply depot. His crew had been together for 8 months now, and they moved like parts of a single machine. Rebecca Davis calculated jump routes that pushed their engines to the breaking point. Carlos Rodriguez performed miracles with damaged systems and salvaged alien components. They had become something new in the galaxy, humans who fought among the stars with nothing but courage and determination. The supply depot defended itself with automated weapons and energy shields. Williams ordered a direct assault that should have been suicide, but humans had learned to turn impossible situations into opportunities. The Phoenix dove straight at the enemy guns while firing everything they had. At the last second, Davis executed a micro-jump that brought them inside the shield perimeter. Rodriguez triggered an electromagnetic pulse that disabled the depot's quantum networks. They were inside and fighting before the aliens even knew they were under attack. Commander Morrison led a different kind of resistance on the occupied worlds. His guerrilla cell operated from hidden bases in mountain caves and underwater cities. They struck at hegemony installations and disappeared back into terrain they knew better than any alien ever could. Morrison had learned that humans possessed advantages that no amount of technology could overcome. The Crystal Vorthak tried to bring order to chaos through precise planning and logical systems. Humans thrived in chaos and used it as a weapon. The insect Zephyrians relied on collective consciousness and shared decision-making. Humans made individual choices that no hive mind could predict. The energy luminals sought to impose their will through superior knowledge. Humans learned by doing and discovered new solutions to old problems. Dr. Patricia Allen took over the research program after Andrew Shaw died in a hegemony bombardment. She had worked with Shaw for years and understood his theories about quantum network vulnerabilities. But Allen pushed the research in new directions that Shaw had never imagined. She began developing weapons that could cause cascade failures throughout entire hegemony fleets. The first test of Allen's new weapon took place in an empty star system far from any inhabited worlds. A volunteer crew aboard an old transport ship activated the device and watched their scanners fill with impossible readings. The quantum cascade spread faster than light through entangled networks and reached a hegemony battle group 3 systems away. 27 alien warships simply stopped working and drifted helplessly through space. The psychological impact was enormous. The hegemony had never lost an entire fleet to an inferior species. Their quantum networks were supposed to be completely secure and impossible to attack. Now a handful of humans with salvaged equipment had turned their greatest advantage into a fatal weakness. Admiral Collins received reports of hegemony forces abandoning positions across human space. Some retreated to defensive formations around major worlds. Others requested reassignment to sectors where they would not have to face human tactics. Fear was spreading through their ranks, like a disease they had no immunity against. President Lewis met with leaders from the newly liberated systems and discussed plans for the future. Humanity had freed itself, but the galaxy remained under hegemony control. Other species looked to humans for leadership and inspiration. Lewis understood that freedom meant nothing if it only applied to one race. The Kalites launched their first open rebellion in 50 years. They used tactics learned from studying human resistance and struck at hegemony installations across their home system. The crystal overlords who had ruled them for decades found themselves facing an enemy they no longer understood. Their former slaves fought with desperate courage and refused to surrender even when facing certain death. Morrison established contact with K-Light rebel leaders and shared intelligence about hegemony weaknesses. He learned that the aliens had never faced a multi-species revolt before. Their systems were designed to control individual races through divide-and-conquer strategies. They had no protocols for dealing with coordinated resistance from multiple species. The Ondari proved even more dangerous as rebels than the K-Lights. They had been enslaved for 3 centuries and knew hegemony systems better than anyone. Ondari technicians sabotaged production facilities in ways that looked like mechanical failures. Ondari pilots crashed transport ships into military installations and claimed engine malfunctions. Ondari scientists introduced computer viruses into quantum networks and blamed programming errors. Alan worked with captured hegemony scientists to understand their technology better. The aliens were genuinely confused by human behavior and asked questions that revealed their own limitations. They could not understand why humans chose death over integration. They could not predict human actions because humans often acted without logical reasons. They could not counter human tactics because humans changed their methods faster than aliens could adapt. The luminal overlight attempted direct mental contact with human leaders to understand their psychology. What it found in their minds terrified it beyond rational thought. Humans did not fear death the way other species did. They saw it as an acceptable price for abstract concepts like freedom and dignity. They had weaponized their own unpredictability and turned chaos into a tactical advantage. Williams led a squadron of human ships against the hegemony fortress world of Kepler Station. The aliens had converted an entire planet into a military base and filled it with their most advanced defenses. No enemy had ever successfully attacked Kepler Station. Williams approached the problem like a human rather than trying to think like an alien. Instead of a direct assault, he divided his forces into dozens of small groups that attacked from every direction at once. Some ships were decoys that drew fire while others carried the real weapons. Some attacked the main defenses while others struck at support systems. Some followed predictable patterns while others moved randomly. The aliens could not coordinate their response because they could not predict what humans would do next. Rebecca Davis calculated a jump that brought the Phoenix directly into the station's command center. Carlos Rodriguez triggered every weapon they had while Williams broadcast a simple message to the defending forces. Humans were coming for them all, and nowhere in the galaxy would be safe from human vengeance. The battle for Kepler Station lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the hegemony's most powerful military installation. Alan's quantum cascade weapons disabled the alien fleets while human boarding parties fought through the station corridors. Morrison's guerrilla tactics spread confusion among the defenders. Williams coordinated the assault with the kind of chaotic precision that only humans seemed capable of achieving. News of the victory spread across the galaxy, faster than hegemony forces could suppress it. Enslaved species realized that their masters were not invincible. Neutral races began to question whether the hegemony truly represented order and stability. Even some hegemony client species started to wonder if they had chosen the wrong side. The High Council met again on Zentara Prime, but this time their discussions were different. The Vorthak Primarch admitted that humans represented a threat they had never faced before. The Zephyrian Queen Mind calculated that current losses were unsustainable if the war continued. The luminal overlight reported that the concept of resistance was spreading beyond military applications into philosophy and culture. For the first time in their 1,000-year expansion, the hegemony leadership considered the possibility of defeat. They had always believed that superior technology and organization would overcome any opposition. Now they faced an enemy that turned their strengths into weaknesses and found opportunities in every crisis. Dr. Allen received a transmission from hegemony scientists requesting a meeting to discuss terms. They wanted to understand human weapons technology and offered to trade information about their own systems. Allen realized that the aliens were no longer thinking about victory. They were trying to limit their losses and find a way to survive what humans had started. The galaxy was changing in ways that no one had predicted. The age of hegemony expansion was ending, and something new was beginning. Humans had shown that freedom was possible, and other species were eager to learn what that meant. The universe was about to discover that some things were worth fighting for no matter what the cost. The hegemony's response to the spreading rebellion was swift and brutal. They began extermination campaigns against species that showed signs of resistance. Entire worlds were sterilized from orbit when their populations refused to return to slavery. The Crystal Primarch announced that the galaxy would learn the price of defying order and stability, but the alien brutality only strengthened human resolve. Admiral Collins received reports of genocide from across hegemony space and knew that humanity could not stand aside, while other species were murdered for wanting freedom. She began planning the largest military operation in human history. Operation Prometheus would take the war directly to hegemony core worlds and force them to face the consequences of their actions. President Lewis addressed the human colonies and explained what they were about to attempt. Earth and all human worlds would commit every available resource to destroying the hegemony once and for all. There would be no retreat and no compromise. Either humanity would win complete victory, or they would die trying. The vote was unanimous across all colonies. Dr. Allen worked around the clock to produce enough quantum cascade weapons for the coming offensive. Her teams operated in hidden facilities throughout human space and pushed their equipment beyond safe limits. They knew that millions of lives depended on their success. Allen herself had not slept more than a few hours in weeks, but she refused to slow down when so much was at stake. Commander Morrison coordinated with rebel leaders from 17 different species. The multi-species alliance that humans had inspired was ready to strike simultaneously across the galaxy. Each race would use tactics suited to their own abilities, but all would follow the human example of never surrendering and never accepting defeat. The human fleet assembled in the outer system beyond Pluto, where hegemony scanners could not detect them. Ships built in asteroid factories and orbital shipyards gathered around Admiral Collins's flagship Constitution. The fleet included everything from massive battleships to tiny fighters piloted by volunteers who knew they might not survive the coming battles. Captain Stephen Blake commanded the heavy cruiser Defiance and led the assault on the Vorthak Crystal worlds. His crews had trained for months in tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They would target civilian infrastructure and military installations without distinction. They would use biological weapons against insect enemies and psychological warfare against energy beings. The hegemony had started this war by threatening extinction. Humans would finish it the same way. Commander Helen Torres guided her destroyer squadron toward Zephyrian hive worlds where billions of insect aliens lived in perfect harmony. Torres had lost her family when the hegemony bombed her home colony. She carried that pain with her as she prepared weapons designed to disrupt hive consciousness and drive entire populations insane. The aliens would learn that humans could be just as ruthless as any galactic empire. Williams flew the Phoenix on the most dangerous mission of all. His target was Zentara Prime itself, where the Hegemony High Council ruled over half the galaxy. The capital world was defended by thousands of ships and orbital weapons platforms that could destroy entire fleets. Williams would have to fight his way through all of them to reach his objective. The attack began simultaneously across dozens of star systems. Human ships appeared without warning and struck at targets the hegemony had never thought to defend. Industrial worlds that supplied their war machine suddenly found themselves under assault by enemies who showed no mercy. Research stations that developed new technologies were destroyed by volunteers who sacrificed their lives to complete their missions. Dr. Allen's quantum cascade weapons proved even more effective than anyone had hoped. Hegemony communication networks collapsed as the cascading failures spread through their entanglement systems. Fleet commanders lost contact with their ships and found themselves fighting blind against enemies who coordinated their attacks perfectly. The aliens' greatest technological advantage became their fatal weakness. The Vorthak crystal worlds shattered under Blake's bombardment. His crews used sonic weapons that resonated at frequencies that cracked crystalline structures. Entire cities collapsed as their harmonic foundations were disrupted by precisely tuned electromagnetic pulses. The crystal beings who had brought order to so many worlds watched their own civilization crumble into chaos. Torres led her destroyers against the Zephyrian hive colonies and released biological agents that attacked insect nervous systems. The hive minds that had functioned perfectly for millions of years began to break down as individual insects lost their connection to the collective consciousness. Entire planets descended into madness as the carefully ordered society collapsed into confusion and terror. Morrison's guerrilla forces struck at hegemony infrastructure throughout occupied space. They destroyed quantum communication arrays and orbital defense platforms. They assassinated alien administrators and liberated prison camps. They spread chaos and fear wherever they went, and showed enslaved species that their masters could be hurt and killed like any other enemy. The luminal overlight attempted to coordinate the hegemony defense, but found its energy-based consciousness overwhelmed by the scale of the human assault. The aliens had never faced an enemy that attacked everywhere at once with such violent determination. Their careful planning and logical responses could not keep pace with human adaptability and creativity. Williams fought his way through the outer defenses of Zentara Prime while the galaxy burned around him. Rebecca Davis plotted impossible courses through dense weapons fire while Carlos Rodriguez kept their engines running despite massive damage. They were one small ship against an entire world, but they carried with them the hopes of every enslaved species in the galaxy. President Lewis activated Allen's most dangerous creation, the Nova bomb that could cause stars to destabilize. She transmitted an ultimatum to the Hegemony High Council, demanding immediate surrender and complete withdrawal from all occupied worlds. If they refused, then humanity would demonstrate what total war truly meant by destroying uninhabited star systems until the aliens capitulated. The Hegemony leadership gathered in their council chamber deep beneath Zentara Prime's surface and debated their response. For the first time in their existence, they faced an enemy that seemed willing to destroy the galaxy rather than accept defeat. The humans had shown that they would use any weapon and pay any price to achieve victory. The Vorthak Primarch insisted that order must be preserved even if it meant fighting to the last crystal being. The Zephyrian Queen Mind calculated that their forces could not sustain current losses much longer. The luminal overlight reported that the concept of resistance had infected their own client species and threatened the foundation of everything they had built. Williams reached Zentara Prime's upper atmosphere as the first Nova bomb detonated in an empty system 50 light-years away. The star collapsed into a black hole that would serve as a permanent reminder of human capability. Lewis broadcast another message explaining that inhabited systems would be next if the hegemony did not surrender within 24 hours. The Phoenix penetrated the capital world's final defenses and landed in the government district, while alien forces converged from all directions. Williams and his crew fought their way through the streets toward the council chamber. They carried with them quantum cascade devices that would disable every piece of hegemony technology on the planet. Allen received the surrender transmission just as Williams reached his target. The Hegemony High Council agreed to unconditional surrender and complete withdrawal from all occupied territories. They would provide reparations to enslaved species and guarantee the independence of every sentient race they had conquered. The 1,000-year empire had fallen to a species they had dismissed as primitive. Admiral Collins addressed the human fleet as news of victory spread across the galaxy. They had accomplished something that seemed impossible just 3 years earlier. They had not only defeated a galactic empire, but changed the fundamental nature of how species interacted in the cosmos. The age of forced integration was over and the age of freedom had begun. The universe had learned that some things were worth any sacrifice to preserve. Humans had shown that determination and courage could overcome any technological advantage. They had proven that the desire for freedom was stronger than the fear of death. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Hegemony High Council met aboard their last remaining command ship as their empire crumbled around them. Their 1,000-year expansion had been stopped by a species they had initially dismissed as too chaotic to pose any real threat. Now, that same chaos was spreading across the galaxy and infecting every world they had once controlled. The Vorthak Primarch looked at the damage reports and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. They had superior technology and overwhelming numbers. They had conquered 47 different species without serious resistance. The humans should have been just another entry in their catalog of integrated races. Instead, they had become the catalyst for the Empire's complete destruction. President Lewis arrived at the surrender negotiations aboard the flagship Constitution with Admiral Collins and the other human leaders. The aliens had requested a meeting to discuss terms, but Lewis made it clear that humanity would accept nothing less than total hegemony withdrawal from all occupied worlds. There would be no partial measures or gradual transitions. The age of alien domination was over. Commander Morrison attended the negotiations as humanity's military representative. His guerrilla forces had liberated dozens of worlds and inspired resistance movements throughout hegemony space. When the Primarch protested that chaos would reign without their guidance, Morrison replied that chaos was preferable to slavery. The galaxy would find its own way to order. Dr. Allen presented the assembled alien leaders with humanity's final gift to the universe. She provided complete technical specifications for quantum cascade weapons to every species represented at the negotiations. The technology that had brought down the mighty hegemony would now be available to anyone who might face similar threats in the future. No empire would ever again dominate the galaxy through technological superiority alone. The luminal overlight attempted to argue that some species needed guidance to develop properly. Humans and their allies had introduced dangerous concepts that could lead to endless warfare between competing groups. Without the hegemony's stabilizing influence, the galaxy might tear itself apart through constant conflict. Admiral Collins responded that freedom always carried risks, but those risks were worth taking. Humanity had learned that lesson through centuries of war and struggle on their own world. Other species deserved the same chance to make their own mistakes and find their own solutions. The alternative was eternal stagnation under alien rule. The surrender ceremony took place in neutral space with representatives from every liberated world in attendance. The Vorthak Primarch formally dissolved the hegemony and ordered all occupation forces to return to their home systems. The Zephyrian Queen Mind released control over enslaved populations and granted them full independence. The luminal overlight transferred administrative authority to local governments on every world they had ruled. Captain Williams watched the proceedings from the Bridge of the Phoenix and felt a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. They had won the war, but the peace would bring new challenges. Dozens of species were suddenly free after centuries of alien rule. Some would thrive in their new independence, while others might struggle to govern themselves. The galaxy was about to become a much more complicated place. The immediate aftermath of the hegemony's collapse created chaos across hundreds of star systems. Some former client species tried to establish their own mini-empires over weaker neighbors. Others descended into civil war as different factions fought for control. Pirates and raiders emerged from hiding to prey on worlds without adequate defenses. But humanity had not fought for 3 years, just to watch freedom turn into anarchy. President Lewis established the Galactic Protection Initiative that would intervene whenever stronger powers tried to dominate weaker ones. The program relied on voluntary cooperation between free species, rather than the forced integration the hegemony had imposed. Morrison led the first GPI mission to the K-Light home system, where former hegemony collaborators were trying to establish a dictatorship. His forces arrived just as the old guard was preparing to execute democratic leaders. The brief battle that followed sent a clear message to anyone planning to fill the power vacuum left by alien withdrawal. The Andari proved most successful at adapting to freedom after their long enslavement. They formed democratic councils that made decisions through consensus rather than decree. Their scientists began developing new technologies that emphasized individual creativity over collective efficiency. They became an example for other species struggling to find their own way forward. Dr. Allen established research stations throughout liberated space where different species could share knowledge and develop new solutions to common problems. The quantum cascade technology was just the beginning. Human creativity combined with alien expertise produced innovations that neither could have achieved alone. The galaxy entered an age of unprecedented scientific advancement. Trade networks developed between the free worlds as species discovered the benefits of voluntary cooperation. The rigid resource allocation systems the hegemony had imposed were replaced by markets that responded to actual needs rather than bureaucratic planning. Prosperity increased dramatically as intelligent beings were free to pursue their own interests and ambitions. Some conflicts were inevitable as newly independent species tested their boundaries. The hegemony had prevented wars by suppressing all dissent, but freedom meant that disagreements would sometimes lead to violence. However, these conflicts were resolved through negotiation and mediation, rather than conquest and enslavement. Captain Blake established patrol squadrons that kept the peace in disputed regions. His crews included volunteers from every liberated species who were determined to prevent any return to the old system of galactic empires. They carried quantum cascade weapons but used them only as a last resort when diplomatic solutions failed. The former hegemony leadership settled on remote worlds far from the mainstream of galactic civilization. Some adapted to their new circumstances and contributed to the peaceful development of their chosen homes. Others retreated into isolation and dreamed of past glory. A few attempted to rebuild their empire but found no support among species that had tasted freedom. Commander Torres led exploration missions that made contact with species beyond the former hegemony borders. These first contact protocols emphasized equality and mutual respect rather than the integration demands that had characterized alien expansion. Many new civilizations chose to join the growing community of free worlds, while others preferred to remain independent. President Lewis addressed the Galactic Assembly on the 5th anniversary of humanity's first contact with the hegemony. Representatives from over 200 species gathered to hear her speak about the lessons learned from their shared struggle. She emphasized that freedom required constant vigilance and the willingness to defend others who face threats to their independence. The Assembly voted to establish permanent institutions that would preserve the peace without recreating the oppression they had fought to destroy. The Galactic Defense Force would protect weak species from strong ones. The Free Trade Commission would ensure fair dealing between different worlds. The Cultural Exchange Program would promote understanding while respecting diversity. Williams took the Phoenix on one final mission to the site where New Eden Colony had once stood. The world was being rebuilt by human colonists who wanted to honor the memory of those who had died there. A monument in the center of the new settlement bore the names of every person who had fallen in humanity's first battle against galactic tyranny. The inscription on the monument was simple but profound. It read that ordinary people had faced impossible odds and chosen to fight rather than surrender. Their sacrifice had changed the course of galactic history and ensured that freedom would spread to every corner of the universe. Future generations would remember that the price of liberty was eternal vigilance. Dr. Allen's research had revealed something remarkable about the quantum networks that connected all matter at the subatomic level. Consciousness itself seemed to be quantum phenomenon that linked intelligent beings across space and time. The hegemony had tried to use this connection to impose uniformity, but humans had shown that it could also be used to spread the desire for freedom. The galaxy was no longer dominated by a single empire, but it was not fragmented into isolated worlds either. A new kind of order was emerging based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced compliance. Species maintained their independence while working together on challenges that affected everyone. It was messy and complicated and sometimes inefficient, but it was also free. Admiral Collins retired from active duty and established a school where young officers from different species could learn about leadership and cooperation. Her students came from worlds that had been enemies just years earlier, but now worked together to build a better future. The curriculum emphasized that strength came from diversity rather than uniformity. The universe had learned fear when humanity fought back against impossible odds, but it had also learned hope. The galaxy discovered that freedom was not just a human concept, but a universal desire that lived in the hearts of all conscious beings.